Athelstan was the first true king of all England. In 937, he won the Battle of Brunanburh, one of the bloodiest battles ever fought on British soil, defeating a combined army of Scots, Celts, Danes, and Vikings. This victory unified the separate Anglo-Saxon kingdoms into a single England for the first time. King Edmund. Athelstan's half-brother Edmund became king at just 18 and successfully re-established Anglo-Saxon control over northern England. His reign ended tragically when he was stabbed to death by a robber at a feast in Pucklechurch. He was only 25 years old. King Adred. Edmund's brother Adred succeeded him and expelled Eric Bloodaxe, the last Scandinavian king of York, in 954. A deeply religious man, he suffered from a serious stomach ailment and died in his early 30s, unmarried and without an heir. King Edwig. Edmund's oldest son, Edwig, then took the throne. His coronation was famously delayed because Bishop Dunstan had to drag him from bed with his mistress and her mother. Unimpressed, Edwig exiled Dunstan to France. He died mysteriously at just 20 years old. King Edgar the Peaceful. Edwig's younger brother Edgar, known as the Peaceful, succeeded him, and his reign saw no Viking invasions, a rare period of peace and prosperity. He reformed England's currency, creating a new unified coinage system, and reorganized the country into the counties or shires we still recognize today. Despite being only around 5 feet tall, he commanded a massive navy of nearly 4,000 ships. Edward the Martyr. Edgar's eldest son, Edward, became king at just 13 years old. He defended the church against nobles attacking monasteries, making him powerful enemies. After only 3 years, the 16-year-old was stabbed in the back while drinking wine on horseback at Corfe Castle, allegedly on his stepmother's orders. He became England's first officially canonized saint in 1001, with his feast day, March 18th, still in the Church of England's Book of Common Prayer today. Ethelred the Unready. Edward's half-brother Ethelred became king at just 10 years old, earning the nickname the Unready, which means badly advised. He's remembered for his disastrous handling of Viking threats, most notably ordering the St. Brice's Day massacre in 1002, where Danish settlers across England were killed. This enraged Sweyn Forkbeard, king of Denmark, who invaded England in revenge. In 1013, Sweyn was proclaimed King of England on Christmas Day, and Ethelred fled to Normandy. However, Sweyn died just 5 weeks later in early 1014, allowing Ethelred to return from exile. Despite regaining his throne, he spent his remaining years in constant warfare with Sweyn's son Canute, never recovering control of his kingdom. King Edmund Ironside. Ethelred's son Edmund earned his Ironside nickname for his courage fighting Canute's invasion. After his father's death, a power struggle erupted with London choosing Edmund and the Witan choosing Canute. Defeated at the Battle of Assandun, Edmund was forced to divide England, keeping only Wessex. The treaty stated whoever died first would lose everything. Edmund died just months later, probably assassinated, having reigned less than a year. Canute the Great. Canute became king after Edmund's death, ruling a vast North Sea empire, including England, Denmark, and Norway. He became surprisingly popular by sending most of his army home and marrying Emma of Normandy, Ethelred's widow. He's famous for commanding the tide not to come in, but this was deliberate, staged to prove to his flattering courtiers that even kings have no power over nature, only God. His reign brought nearly 2 decades of peace and prosperity. King Harold Harefoot. Canute's illegitimate son Harold claimed the throne while his half-brother Harthacnut, the rightful heir, was defending Denmark. Nicknamed Harefoot for his speed and hunting skills, Harold died in 1040, just weeks before Harthacnut's planned invasion. In revenge, Harthacnut had Harold's corpse dug up from Westminster Abbey, beheaded and thrown into the Thames. King Harthacnut. Canut's legitimate son Harthacnut finally claimed England after Harold Harefoot's death. He was the last Danish king to rule England and proved to be deeply unpopular. He raised taxes so harshly during a poor harvest that when the people of Worcester killed 2 tax collectors, he ordered their city burned to the ground. In 1042, at a wedding feast, Harthacnut collapsed while toasting the bride and died aged just 24. King Edward the Confessor. Harthacnut's half-brother Edward restored Saxon rule after 26 years of Danish kings, having spent 28 years in exile in Normandy. His greatest legacy is Westminster Abbey, built in the Norman Romanesque style, the first of its kind in England. He was the only English king to be canonized by the Pope, becoming a saint in 1161. Edward died childless, triggering the succession crisis that led to the Norman Conquest. King Harold II. Edward the Confessor's brother-in-law Harold had no royal blood, but was elected king by the Witan. His reign lasted just 9 months and saw 2 major invasions. First, he marched his army 185 miles from London to Yorkshire in just 4 days to defeat the Norwegian king Harald Hardrada at Stamford Bridge. Just 3 days later, William of Normandy landed in the south. Harold force-marched his exhausted army back down and was killed at the Battle of Hastings in 1066, ending Saxon England forever. King William the Conqueror. After defeating Harold at Hastings, William became the first Norman king. Known as William the Bastard due to his illegitimate birth, he transformed England by replacing the Saxon aristocracy with Normans, introducing the feudal system and building hundreds of castles. In 1086, he commissioned the Domesday Book, a survey of all land in England, Britain's oldest surviving public record, still held at the National Archives today. Norman French became the language of court, giving us words like beef, pork, and noble. He died in 1087 after falling from his horse. King William II. The Conqueror's 3rd son, called Rufus for his red hair, was deeply unpopular. He raided monasteries and kept bishoprics empty to pocket their revenues. He never married or produced heirs. On August 2nd, 1100, he was mysteriously killed by an arrow while hunting in the New Forest. The Rufus Stone in Hampshire still marks where he fell. King Henry I. The Conqueror's youngest son seized the throne just 3 days later. Called the Lion of Justice for giving England good laws, his reign was shattered by the White Ship disaster in 1120. A drunken crew crashed into rocks and around 300 people drowned, including his only legitimate son, William. It's said Henry never smiled again. With no male heir, he named his daughter Matilda as successor, but when he died in 1135, his nephew Stephen seized the throne instead. King Stephen. Stephen rushed to England and seized the throne before Matilda could arrive. A brave soldier but weak king, his reign plunged England into 19 years of civil war known as the Anarchy. In 1141, Stephen was captured at the Battle of Lincoln, but later exchanged for Matilda's half-brother. The war only ended when Stephen's son died in 1153, forcing him to name Matilda's son Henry as heir. Stephen died the following year, ending Norman rule and beginning the Plantagenet dynasty. King Henry II. Matilda's son Henry became the first Plantagenet king, ruling a vast empire through his marriage to Eleanor of Aquitaine. He laid the foundations of the English jury system, but he's most remembered for his quarrel with Thomas Becket, whom he made Archbishop of Canterbury. When Becket defied him, 4 knights murdered him, resulting in Henry doing public penance. His final years were plagued by rebellions from his own sons. King Richard I, the Lionheart. Henry II's 3rd son earned his nickname Lionheart for his fearless military prowess. Despite being King of England for 10 years, he spent only 6 months in the country, viewing it mainly as a source of funds for his wars. He led the Third Crusade and won brilliant victories against Saladin. On his return, he was captured by Duke Leopold of Austria and ransomed for 150,000 marks, nearly 3 times the kingdom's annual income, to free him. He was killed in 1199 by a crossbow bolt while besieging a French castle. King John. Richard's younger brother John is often called England's worst king. He lost nearly all English territories in France, earning him the nickname Lackland, and quarrelled so bitterly with the Pope that England was placed under interdict for 6 years. In 1215, they forced him to sign Magna Carta, which limited royal power and established that even the king was subject to the law, a document that still influences legal systems worldwide. John died the following year. King Henry III. Henry became king aged only 9 years old, succeeding his father, King John. He was crowned at Gloucester with his mother's bracelet, since the crown jewels were lost. His generally weak rule sparked baronial rebellion. Captured at the Battle of Lewes in 1264, he was forced to set up a parliament at Westminster, the origins of the House of Commons. His greatest legacy is commissioning Westminster Abbey's rebuilding in the Gothic style we recognise today. King Edward I. Edward succeeded his father Henry III while away on crusade. A formidable soldier known as Longshanks for his height, he conquered Wales and built a ring of imposing castles to secure English rule, creating his son the first English Prince of Wales. He earned the title Hammer of the Scots for his brutal Scottish campaigns, seizing the Stone of Scone for Westminster. Edward established the Model Parliament in 1295, uniting knights, clergy, nobility, lords and commons for the first time. King Edward II. Edward succeeded his father Edward I, but proved a weak and incompetent king. He was despised by his barons and suffered a humiliating defeat to the Scots at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314. His own wife, Isabella, joined her secret lover in deposing him in 1327, and Edward was imprisoned in Berkeley Castle. He was murdered there shortly after, legend claims, by having a red-hot poker thrust into his body so as to leave no visible marks. King Edward III. Edward became king at 14 after his father was deposed. His 50-year reign was defined by the 100 Years' War with France, and his stunning victories at Crécy and Poitiers, alongside his son the Black Prince, made them the most renowned warriors in Europe. Edward founded the Order of the Garter, England's highest order of chivalry, which endures today. However, his reign was marred by the Black Death in 1348 to 1350, a plague killing half the population of England. He outlived the Black Prince and died aged 64. King Richard II. Richard became king aged 10, succeeding his grandfather Edward III. At 14, he showed remarkable courage, facing down the peasants' revolt. However, he grew into an extravagant and tyrannical ruler after the death of his beloved wife, Anne of Bohemia. Deeply unpopular by the end of his reign, he was deposed and imprisoned in Pontefract Castle, where he was murdered in 1400, probably by starvation. Shakespeare later immortalized his tragic downfall in the play Richard II. King Henry IV. Henry seized the throne from his cousin, Richard II, after returning from exile, becoming the first Lancastrian monarch. He spent most of his reign defending himself against plots and rebellions. Exhausted by constant conflict and plagued by a mysterious illness, possibly leprosy, Henry died aged 45, a broken man who never knew a peaceful reign. King Henry V. Henry succeeded his father Henry IV and proved a brilliant soldier. He was knighted aged just 12. He renewed the war with France and against tremendous odds won the legendary Battle of Agincourt in 1415, becoming the most celebrated warrior in Europe. He was recognized as heir to the French throne and married Catherine, the French king's daughter. However, he never wore the French crown and died of dysentery campaigning in France aged 35. King Henry VI. Henry became king at just a baby, inheriting both England and France. Gentle and pious, he was more suited to religious devotion than ruling. He founded Eton College and King's College, Cambridge. He lost all French lands except Calais, and in 1453 suffered the first of several bouts of mental illness, sparking the Wars of the Roses as the House of York challenged his right to rule. Deposed in 1461, briefly restored in 1470, Henry was murdered in the Tower of London in 14 interred at Leicester Cathedral in 2015. King Henry VII. When Richard III fell at Bosworth, his crown was placed on Henry Tudor's head, the first Tudor monarch. To unite the warring houses of York and Lancaster, he married Elizabeth of York, merging the white and red roses into the Tudor rose. A shrewd ruler obsessed with securing his dynasty, he filled the royal coffers through heavy taxation. Though not loved, he brought stability after decades of civil war and left England wealthy and peaceful. King Henry VIII. I'm sure you've been waiting for this one. Henry is best remembered for one thing, his 6 wives. But his desperation for a male heir led him to break from Rome when the Pope refused to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, declaring himself supreme head of the Church of England. He dissolved the monasteries and seized their wealth, transforming England into a Protestant nation. He fathered 3 children who would all later wear the crown, though he executed 2 of their mothers to get there. King Edward VI. Edward, the son of Henry VIII and Jane Seymour, became king at just 9 years old. He was raised as a devout Protestant, and his reign saw England become firmly Protestant, with Thomas Cranmer's Book of Common Prayer establishing a new form of worship. He died of tuberculosis, aged only 15, to which Lady Jane Grey would succeed him. However, she only reigned for 9 days before our next monarch later had her executed. Queen Mary I. Mary seized the throne, supported by the people who saw her as Henry VIII's rightful heir. A devout Catholic, her persecution of Protestants earned her the name Bloody Mary. Nearly 300 were burned at the stake, including Archbishop Cranmer. Deeply unpopular by the end of her reign, she suffered false pregnancies and declining health. She died childless, aged 42. Queen Elizabeth I. The daughter of Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth succeeded her half-sister Mary and restored England to Protestantism. Known as the Virgin Queen, she never married. Her era saw England flourish. Shakespeare wrote his greatest works. Drake circumnavigated the globe, and the Spanish Armada was defeated in 1588. Adored by her people, she had a genius for choosing capable advisors. She died aged 69, ending the Tudor dynasty. King James I. James was already King of Scotland when he inherited the English throne from Elizabeth I, becoming the first monarch to rule both kingdoms. He commissioned the King James Bible in 1611, one of the most influential books in the English language. His reign was mainly marked by religious tension, most famously the Gunpowder Plot, headed up by Guy Fawkes and his Catholic conspirators in 1605. He died aged 58. King Charles I. Charles, like his father James, believed he ruled by divine right, bringing him into constant conflict with Parliament. His attempts to impose religious reforms and raise taxes without parliamentary consent led to the outbreak of the English Civil War in 1642. After 4 years of brutal fighting, Charles was defeated by Oliver Cromwell's New Model Army and captured. In an unprecedented act, he was tried for treason against his own people and beheaded in 1649, the only English monarch to be publicly executed. The monarchy was abolished and England became a republic. Oliver Cromwell. Cromwell rose from minor gentry to become the most powerful man in England. A devout Puritan and powerful military commander, he led the New Model Army to victory and was instrumental in Charles I's execution. Declared Lord Protector, he ruled strictly, banning theatres, Christmas, and other pleasures. He brutally crushed resistance in Ireland and Scotland, actions still remembered with bitterness today. Cromwell died aged 59, and his son Richard briefly succeeded him, but lacked authority. Within 2 years, the monarchy was restored. King Charles II. Charles was invited to restore the monarchy after the collapse of the Protectorate, entering London to cheering crowds on his 30th birthday. Known as the Merry Monarch, he had at least 13 mistresses, including the famous Nell Gwyn. His reign saw the Great Plague of 1665 and the Great Fire of London in 1666, after which Christopher Wren rebuilt St. Paul's Cathedral. Though popular, he was a weak ruler. He fathered numerous illegitimate children, but no legitimate heir, and was received into the Catholic Church on his deathbed, aged 54. King James II. The younger brother of Charles II, James had converted to Catholicism in 1670, but his 2 daughters were raised as Protestants. James became extremely unpopular because of his persecution of the Protestant clergy and was hated by many. Following the Monmouth Uprising and the bloody assizes of Judge Jeffreys, Parliament asked the Dutch prince, William of Orange, to take the throne. King William III and Queen Mary II. William of Orange landed in England with his fleet in 1688 and marched on London unopposed. The Glorious Revolution was complete. He and his wife Mary, James II's daughter, were crowned as joint monarchs, the only time this has happened in English history. Mary tragically died of smallpox, aged just 32. William continued to rule alone, defeating James II's attempt to reclaim the throne at the Battle of the Boyne in Ireland in 1690. Never popular in England, William died aged 51 from a horse accident. Queen Anne. Anne succeeded William III, becoming the last Stuart monarch. Anne's greatest achievement was the Act of Union in 1707, uniting England and Scotland into the Kingdom of Great Britain. Her personal life was tragic. She had 17 pregnancies, but no child survived to adulthood, leaving her without an heir. Plagued by ill health and increasingly obese, Anne died aged 49. The crown passed to her distant cousin George of Hanover, beginning a new dynasty. King George I. George arrived from Hanover, aged 54, to claim the British throne. Barely able to speak English and showing little interest in learning, he brought with him his 2 mistresses and 18 cooks, but left his wife behind. He had imprisoned her for adultery. George left the running of the country to his ministers, leading to the rise of Robert Walpole as Britain's first Prime Minister. It was clear George preferred Hanover and died there aged 67 during a visit. King George II. Though more English than his father, George I, he still relied heavily on Robert Walpole to run the country. George was the last British monarch to lead his army into battle, fighting at Dettingen in 1743 during the War of Austrian Succession. His reign saw the final Jacobite attempt to restore the Stuarts by Bonnie Prince Charlie's uprising in 1745, but was crushed. George died suddenly, aged 76. King George III. Known as the Mad King, George was the first Hanoverian king born in England. His 60-year reign was an age of elegance, and great literary figures like Jane Austen, Shelley and Wordsworth, as well as military heroes like Nelson and Wellington. However, he lost the American colonies after they declared independence in 1776 and spent much of his reign at war with revolutionary and Napoleonic France. George suffered from severe mental illness, now believed to be caused by porphyria, and eventually became permanently blind and insane. King George IV. George had ruled as Prince Regent since 1811 due to his father's madness. Known as the first gentleman of Europe for his wit and taste, he was also a buffoon, extravagant, self-indulgent, and wildly unpopular. He married twice, once secretly and once officially. His love of art and architecture left a lasting legacy, including the Brighton Pavilion and much of Regent's Park. George died aged 67, his passing greeted with relief at the time, rather than mourning. King William IV. The brother of George IV, William never expected to become king, having spent 10 years in the Royal Navy, earning him the nickname the Sailor King. Before becoming king, he lived openly with actress Mrs. Jordan, fathering 10 illegitimate children. His reign saw the abolition of slavery in the British colonies in 1833 and the Reform Act of 1832 extending voting rights. William died aged 71 with no surviving legitimate heir, passing the throne to someone who would become one of Britain's greatest. Queen Victoria. Victoria inherited a weak and unpopular throne aged just 18. But her 63-year reign transformed the monarchy and defined a whole era, the Victorian era. In 1840, she married her cousin, Prince Albert, the love of her life, and together they had 9 children, whose descendants spread across European royalty. Albert's death in 1861 devastated her. She withdrew from public life for years and wore black for the rest of her days. Her reign saw the British Empire double in size, and in 1876 she became Empress of India. In 1897, she became the first monarch to celebrate a Diamond Jubilee. Victoria died aged 81, the longest reigning monarch in British history at that time. King Edward VII. Edward waited 60 years to become king, having spent his life as Prince of Wales, while his mother Victoria refused to give him any real responsibility. Known as Bertie, he adored horse racing, gambling, and women. Despite his reputation for scandal, he proved a popular and skilled king, using his charm to improve relations with France and earning the nickname the Peacemaker. His brief 9-year reign became known as the Edwardian era, a time of elegance before the coming storm. Edward died aged 68. King George V. George succeeded his father Edward VII and proved to be a steady, dutiful king during turbulent times. In 1893, he married Princess Mary of Teck, his dead brother's fiancée. His reign began with the sinking of the Titanic in 1912, but far greater tragedy followed with the First World War from 1914 to 1918. In 1917, with anti-German sentiment high, he changed the family name from Saxe-Coburg and Gotha to Windsor, the name the royal family still bears today. George died aged 70, having steered the monarchy through war and revolution. King Edward VIII. Edward was the most popular Prince of Wales Britain had ever seen, but his reign lasted less than a year. He was determined to marry the American divorcee Wallis Simpson, who had 2 ex-husbands still living, unacceptable to the Church and Parliament. Faced with the choice between the crown and the woman he loved, Edward chose love, abdicating in December 1936 and becoming the only British monarch to voluntarily give up the throne. He spent the rest of his life in exile abroad. King George VI. George never expected to be king, thrust onto the throne when his elder brother Edward abdicated. Shy and plagued by a severe stammer, he worked with a speech therapist to overcome it, a story later told in the film The King's Speech. His greatest test came with the Second World War, during which he refused to leave London despite the bombing. Their steadfast presence made them beloved by the British people. George's reign also saw the birth of the National Health Service and the beginning of the end of the British Empire with Indian independence in 1947. Exhausted by years of strain and a heavy smoker, George died of lung cancer aged 56. Queen Elizabeth II. Elizabeth became queen aged 25. Her coronation in 1953 was the first to be televised, watched by millions around the world. She reigned for 70 years, the longest of any British monarch, witnessing extraordinary change from post-war austerity to the digital age. Throughout it all, she remained a constant, dutiful presence and earning deep respect for her dedication to service. She celebrated her Platinum Jubilee in June 2022, just months before her death at Balmoral, aged 96. Elizabeth II was survived by 4 children, 8 grandchildren, and 12 great-grandchildren. King Charles III. Charles became king aged 73, the oldest heir apparent ever to succeed to the British throne, having waited longer than anyone in history. He married Lady Diana Spencer in 1981 in a fairy tale wedding watched by 750 million people, but the marriage ended in divorce and Diana's fatal car crash in 1997. Charles later married his longtime love Camilla Parker Bowles, who became queen upon his accession. Charles's legacy is still being written today. And there you have it. Every monarch of England from King Athelstan to Charles III, spanning nearly 1,200 years of history.